"Say it again," someone whispered. Not loud enough for the microphones, not loud enough to become record, but loud enough to reach the woman standing alone at the defendant's table, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles looked like paper. Across the aisle, a man leaned back in his tailored suit as if the courtroom were his private theater. He didn't look at the judge when the clerk spoke. He didn't look at the sealing seal. He looked only at her, at the wife he had already decided was finished. Beside him sat a woman with glossy hair and a smile sharpened into a blade. She wore white, not because it was appropriate, but because she wanted to be seen, a pale, victorious ghost at the edge of someone else's marriage. The man's mouth tilted as he murmured to her, amused. "She really thought she could come in here and take half," he said. "Half of what I built." The other woman laughed under her breath, a sound like ice in a glass. "She doesn't even have a lawyer who matters," she said. "Look at her. She's nobody." Nobody. That word hit the air and hung there, heavy as humidity before a storm. At the bench, Judge Miriam Kessler's eyes were lowered to the file in front of her. The overhead lights left a quiet sheen on the polished wood, the kind of shine that looked clean until you noticed the scratches, years of arguments, years of lies, years of people insisting they were the victim. A bailiff shifted his weight near the wall. Somewhere in the back, a radiator clicked. Outside, Manhattan rain tapped against the tall windows in a steady, impatient rhythm. Judge Kessler lifted her head. For a moment, she didn't look at the husband. She didn't look at the mistress. Her gaze landed on the wife, the one who had been standing so still she might have been mistaken for furniture. "Before we proceed," the judge said, voice calm, "I need to confirm your identity for the record." The clerk's fingers paused above the keyboard. The wife swallowed once. The judge leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowing, not with suspicion, but with something else. Recognition, maybe, or instinct. "State your full legal name," Judge Kessler said, slowly. A breath, a beat. Then the wife finally spoke. "Evelyn," she said. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "Evelyn Waverly Cross." The courtroom didn't erupt. It didn't gasp dramatically like in movies. It did something far stranger. It went still. As if the name had flipped a hidden switch in the building itself. The court reporter's hands froze above the stenograph keys. Grant Hale, the husband's lawyer, a man who never paused, stopped turning his pen. And on the bench, Judge Kessler's expression changed in a way so subtle it would have been missed by anyone who hadn't spent years learning how power moved through a room. She glanced down at the file again, then back up, slower now. "Waverly," she repeated almost to herself. The husband's smile faltered just a fraction. The mistress's white teeth flashed as she tried to laugh it off, but the sound didn't come. Judge Kessler's gavel sat in her hand like a warning. Then she spoke one sentence that made the air feel thinner. "Counsel," she said quietly, "why wasn't the court notified?" Damian Cross leaned toward his attorney, confused and irritated. "What is she talking about?" he hissed. But Grant Hale didn't answer. He was staring at Evelyn as if she had just taken off a mask. Evelyn didn't move. She kept her hands clasped. She kept her eyes on the bench, and the rain outside kept tapping, 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 like a countdown. Because the truth was, Damian Cross had mocked his wife with his mistress for months. He'd mocked her in front of employees, in front of friends, in front of strangers. He'd mocked her because he believed she had nowhere to go. He didn't know the courtroom had been waiting for one name. And to understand why Judge Kessler's voice had changed when she said, "Waverly, we have to go back." Not to the beginning of their marriage, not even to the day Damian met the woman who would become his mistress. We have to go back to the night Evelyn Cross decided she would rather be nobody than be a Waverly. The first time Evelyn stepped into Damian's world, she made a choice without realizing it. It happened at a charity gala on the Upper East Side. Glass walls, white orchids, waiters moving like shadows with trays of champagne. The kind of place where people smiled too brightly and spoke too softly, because loudness was for those who needed attention. Evelyn had been invited by a friend who worked in event planning. She wasn't a guest, not really. She was the quiet helper who fixed centerpieces and checked seating cards, her hair pinned back, her dress simple because it had to be. It was a disguise she wore easily. Normal. Nobody. At the edge of the ballroom, Evelyn watched men in tailored suits exchange handshakes that meant more than greetings. She watched women drift in shimmering fabric, their laughter performing confidence. She watched Damien cross from across the room before she knew his name. He stood near the bar speaking to investors like he belonged to them. He wasn't the richest man in the room, not then, but he had something that made people turn their heads. Hunger. He talked with his hands. He smiled like he had already won. When their eyes met, it wasn't romantic. It was recognition of a certain kind of loneliness. Damien's world was loud. Evelyn's was quiet. But both were built on the same thing, a refusal to be small. He approached her not like he was collecting a number, but like he was genuinely curious. "You're not drinking," he said, nodding toward the champagne. "I'm working," Evelyn replied. He glanced at her hands, floral tape on one finger, a faint smear of glue on her thumb. "You make the room look perfect," he said, "and nobody notices you." It wasn't an insult. It was an observation. Evelyn didn't flinch. She had grown up in rooms where people pretended not to see her until they needed her signature. She understood invisibility. "Maybe I like it that way," she said. Damien smiled, the first real one she'd seen on him all night. "Me too," he admitted, "but I'm bad at it." She should have walked away. There were 100 reasons she should have kept her distance. She knew what ambition did to men. She knew what power demanded in exchange for comfort. But that night, when Damien asked for her number, Evelyn gave it. Not because she was desperate, because for the first time in a long time, someone looked at her like she was a person and not a last name. They didn't talk about family on the first date. Evelyn made sure of that. They talked about cheap diners with perfect coffee, about long walks by the river when Manhattan felt less like a machine, about the dream of building something that could not be taken away. Damien talked about his company, Cross Meridian Technologies, a healthcare analytics startup he swore would change the world. He spoke with the bright certainty of someone who believed the future would apologize for doubting him. Evelyn listened. She asked questions nobody else asked. Not the kind that flattered him, the kind that sharpened him. "What happens if your biggest client leaves?" she'd say, stirring sugar into coffee. "What happens if your data model is wrong? What happens if you have to fire people?" Damien loved it. He loved that she wasn't impressed by the noise. He didn't know she had been trained to hear lies in boardrooms the way other people heard music. When he asked about her past, she gave him a simplified truth. "I grew up around money," she said carefully, "and I didn't like what it did to people." He nodded like he understood. "You're not like them," he said. Evelyn didn't correct him, because the whole point was that she didn't want to be like them anymore. When Damien proposed a year later, he did it in a small apartment with a cheap ring and an expensive promise. "I want you with me when it all works," he said, "not just when it's easy." Evelyn stared at the ring, at how the light caught on its simple stone. Her first instinct was fear, not of marriage, of what marriage would reveal. Because Evelyn wasn't just around money. Evelyn had been born into something that wasn't money at all. It was an empire. The Waverly Dominion Group. Old institutions with new teeth, banking, real estate, pharmaceuticals, private equity. A name printed on buildings and whispered in closed-door deals. And a family that treated loyalty like currency. Evelyn had left at 22 after a night that still tasted like blood and champagne. She'd changed her address, simplified her life, and promised herself she would never again be the girl who signed away other people's futures with a pen. She'd become Evelyn Waverly only on paper. In life, she was Evelyn, just Evelyn. Damien slipped the ring onto her finger. "Yes," she said, and she told herself she could keep the rest hidden. For a while, she did. For a while, it was beautiful. They moved into a modest townhouse in Brooklyn. They cooked pasta late at night when Damien came home exhausted. Evelyn sat with his spreadsheets, pointing out flaws, asking questions, tightening his pitch decks with the kind of clarity that came from surviving sharks. Damien's company started to grow. Investors came, then bigger investors, then the kind of meetings that required silence and leather chairs. Damien would come home and kiss her forehead, grateful. "I couldn't do this without you," he would say. Evelyn believed him. She believed him until the day he asked her for a signature. It wasn't dramatic. It was just a folder placed on the kitchen counter, next to a bowl of fruit. "There's a new structure," Damien explained casually. "A holding company. It helps with taxes. It's standard." Evelyn skimmed the pages. The language was thick, legal, designed to make the reader tired. Her eyes caught on one line, Waverly Family Trust. Her stomach tightened. Damien noticed. "What?" he asked, frowning. "Is something wrong?" Evelyn's fingers hovered above the page. "You said this was standard," she said. "It is," Damien insisted. "My lawyer says it's the cleanest way. My investors want it." Evelyn's throat went dry. She could feel the old world pressing against her ribs, whispering, "You don't get to escape so easily." If Damien was putting Waverly Family Trust in his structure, it meant he had found something, maybe without realizing it, maybe by accident. It meant the two lives she'd been keeping separate were about to collide. "Who told you about Waverly?" she asked softly. Damien blinked. "Waverly? It's just a name. My lawyer pulled templates. Why?" Evelyn stared at him. He genuinely didn't know. And that was the first crack. Not because he was lying, because he was building something on top of a foundation he didn't understand. Evelyn's hand closed around the pen on the counter, a pen Damien had given her as a joke for their anniversary. Black lacquer engraved with a single letter, W. He didn't know why she'd gone pale when she saw it. Evelyn looked at her husband, the man who had asked her to walk beside him, who had said he wanted her there when it worked. And she made the second choice without realizing it. She signed, Evelyn Waverly. Not because she wanted to give Damien power, because she wanted to keep him safe from what that name could do if it turned toward him. Because she told herself she could control it. She told herself the empire didn't have to touch their life. She was wrong. People think betrayal is a moment, a lipstick smear on a collar, a message on a phone, a hotel receipt. But the truth is, betrayal usually begins with something quieter, a change in tone, a look that doesn't land the same, a hand that stops reaching for yours in the dark. It began, for Evelyn, with Damien's laughter. Not the laughter he used with her when they were alone, soft and surprised, like he couldn't believe happiness was real. A new laughter. A performance. The first time Evelyn heard it, it was at Cross Meridian's new headquarters in Midtown. Damien had insisted she attend the launch party. "It's our night," he said, squeezing her hand in the elevator. "I want you there." Evelyn wore a navy dress that made her feel like herself. She didn't dress like the women Damien's investors brought. She didn't need to. But when the doors opened, the room was full of polished faces and expensive perfume, and Evelyn felt something shift. Damien moved through the crowd with ease. People clapped him on the back. People laughed too loudly at his jokes. And then Evelyn saw her. Sloane Hart. She stood near the bar with a glass of champagne, posture perfect, smile calculated. She wasn't wearing a name tag because she didn't need one. Everyone in the room knew who she was. Sloane worked in business development. She was good at it. Everyone said so. She had brought in clients, closed deals, made the company look bigger than it was. Damien introduced Evelyn to her with a proud sweep of his arm. "This is my wife," he said, as if he were presenting a trophy. Sloane's eyes slid over Evelyn like a scanner. "Evelyn," Sloane said, "I've heard so much." "Only good things," Damien added quickly, laughing. Sloane's smile deepened, just slightly. "I'm sure," she said. Evelyn noticed the way Sloane leaned closer to Damien than necessary. The way Damien didn't move away. It wasn't proof. It wasn't a smoking gun, but it was a signal. Later, when Evelyn tried to take Damien's hand, He was pulled into another conversation. He didn't return. Evelyn watched him across the room, watched Sloane place a hand on his arm, watched his face light up as if he were being seen by someone new. And something inside Evelyn, something fragile she had protected for years, tightened. She told herself she was tired. She told herself she was imagining it. She told herself she'd survived worse. The next months were a slow unravel. Damien came home later. His phone turned face down on tables. His laughter changed again, sharper, more impatient. And then came the night of the rain. Manhattan rain, heavy and cold, turning the streets into mirrors. Evelyn had been waiting at the kitchen table, their son Noah asleep upstairs. Damien was supposed to be home at 8. At 9, she texted. At 10, she called. At 11, the front door finally opened. Damien entered smelling like cologne that wasn't his. He looked at Evelyn like she was an inconvenience. "Where were you?" Evelyn asked, voice low so she wouldn't wake Noah. Damien tossed his keys into a bowl too hard. "Working," he said. "Working doesn't leave lipstick on your collar," Evelyn said. Damien froze. His hand went to his shirt as if he hadn't noticed. Then he laughed. That new laughter. "You're seriously doing this?" he scoffed. "After everything I'm doing for this family?" Evelyn stood slowly. "I'm asking the simplest question," she said. "Don't make me feel crazy for noticing what's right in front of me." Damien stepped closer. His eyes were bright with irritation, not guilt. "You don't understand what pressure is," he said. "You don't understand what I'm building." Evelyn's throat tightened. "I helped you build it," she said. Damien's face hardened. "You typed some emails," he snapped. "You made some comments. That's not building." The words landed like a slap. Evelyn stared at him, breathing shallow. And that's when she realized what her central wound would be. Not the affair, not even the humiliation, but the erasure. The way Damien was rewriting their story so that Evelyn became an accessory, a background detail, a woman who owed him gratitude for existing. Evelyn's fingers curled around the edge of the table. Upstairs, Noah coughed in his sleep. Evelyn forced her voice to stay steady. "Tell me the truth," she said. "Are you sleeping with Sloane?" Damien's jaw tightened. He didn't answer immediately. And in that silence, Evelyn felt something crack. Not because she needed confirmation, because she realized she was no longer married to someone who cared whether she believed him. Damien's eyes slid away. "It's complicated," he finally said. There it was, the truth wrapped in a coward's phrase. Evelyn nodded once, slowly. "Okay," she said. "Then we need to talk about what happens next." Damien stared at her, incredulous. "What happens next is you stop being dramatic," he said. "You stop interrogating me like I'm some criminal. You remember who pays for this house." Evelyn's blood went cold. "You think this is your house?" she whispered. Damien's brows knit. "What did you just say?" Evelyn didn't answer, because she couldn't. Because if she said what she was thinking, if she told him that the deed was held under a trust he didn't understand, if she told him the money he called his had been quietly stabilized by a name he didn't respect, then the empire would enter their kitchen like smoke. And Evelyn had sworn it never would. So she did what she had always done when trapped. She went quiet. Damien mistook her silence for surrender. That night, he went upstairs and slept in their bed like nothing had changed. Evelyn stayed at the table until the rain slowed. The next morning, she found Noah's drawing on the fridge, a stick figure family holding hands. 3 figures, smiling. Evelyn stared until her eyes burned, and she made a decision that would shape everything that followed. She would not beg. She would not scream. She would not chase a man who had already left. She would protect her child, and she would prepare. In the weeks that followed, Evelyn began to collect the quiet evidence that power never expected from a woman it had dismissed. She photographed documents Damien left on the desk. She noted dates. She listened when he spoke too freely. She watched Sloane's car outside their house on nights Damien said he was traveling. She didn't confront him again, not because she was afraid, because she knew confrontation was for people who needed the other person to admit guilt. Evelyn didn't need Damien's confession. She needed his collapse to be undeniable. And in her dresser drawer, beneath folded sweaters, the black pen engraved with a W waited like a loaded weapon. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday, not by mail, by hand. A young courier in a stiff jacket knocked on Evelyn's door at noon, while Noah was at school and the house was too quiet. Evelyn opened the door and saw the envelope. Saw her name printed in clean, impersonal letters. Evelyn Cross. No mention of Waverly. The courier didn't meet her eyes. "Sign here," he said. Evelyn took the clipboard, signed with a steady hand, and closed the door. Only then did she allow herself to breathe. She sat at the kitchen table with the envelope in front of her as if it might explode. Rain tapped softly against the window again. Manhattan never stopped reminding her what time it was. She opened the envelope. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Request for full custody. Claims of spousal misconduct. An allegation, thinly phrased but poisonous, that Evelyn was emotionally unstable and unfit. Evelyn's fingers tightened on the paper. Damien wasn't just leaving her. He was trying to erase her from Noah's life. It was the cruelest thing he could do to a woman he now considered disposable. Evelyn didn't cry. She stared at the words until they blurred, then reached for her phone. She didn't call Damien. She didn't call a friend. She called a number she hadn't called in years. A law office in Lower Manhattan, old brick building, old money smell. Walter Pierce answered on the third ring. His voice was gravel and calm. "Pierce?" "It's Evelyn," she said. A pause, then something softened in his tone, just slightly. "Evelyn Waverly?" he asked quietly. Evelyn closed her eyes. "Yes," she said, "but I don't use that." Walter exhaled like he'd been waiting for this call without admitting it. "What happened?" he asked. Evelyn looked down at the papers. "My husband thinks I'm nobody," she said, "and he's trying to take my son." Silence. Then Walter's voice controlled. "Come in," he said. "Today." By the time Evelyn arrived at Walter's office, the rain had turned the sidewalks into slush. She shook water from her coat and stepped inside. The office was quiet. Leather chairs, shelves of law books, a framed photo on the wall of a much younger Walter shaking hands with someone Evelyn recognized immediately. A Waverly. Evelyn's stomach tightened. Walter noticed her glance. "I did work for your family once," he said, pouring 2 cups of coffee. "Long time ago." Evelyn didn't ask more. She didn't want to know what he knew. She sat, hands folded. Walter read the divorce petition in silence. His expression didn't change until he reached the custody request. Then his jaw tightened. "He's going for your throat," Walter said. Evelyn's voice was steady. "Yes." Walter looked up at her. "Why didn't you come sooner?" he asked. Evelyn stared at her hands. "Because if I come as a Waverly," she said softly, "they come too." Walter studied her. "You left for a reason," he said. Evelyn's eyes flickered. A memory surfaced. Champagne, flashing cameras, a ballroom full of people who thought they owned her future. A night she had walked out into rain and never gone back. "Yes," she whispered. Walter leaned back. "Damien Cross," he said, tasting the name. "He thinks he's divorcing a quiet Brooklyn wife. He has no idea he's touching an ecosystem that doesn't forgive." Evelyn's voice hardened. "I don't want revenge," she said. "I want my son safe. I want my life back." Walter nodded once. "Sometimes," he said, "those are the same thing." From that day forward, the divorce became a war fought in whispers. Damien didn't call Evelyn to discuss terms. He sent Grant Hale. Grant Hale's emails were polished threats wrapped in legal language. Offer: a small settlement if she signed a non-disclosure agreement. Offer: visitation at Damien's discretion. Offer: a clause that Evelyn would not speak publicly about Cross Meridian. Evelyn read each message without replying. Walter replied for her, terse and firm. Damien grew angrier. Not because Evelyn refused. Because Evelyn refused quietly. He wanted her to beg. He wanted her to show emotion so he could frame it as instability. Instead, she moved like water, slipping out of his grasp. So Damien escalated in public. At Cross Meridian, he began telling people Evelyn was unstable. He told investors she was jealous. He told friends she was trying to ruin him. And then, on a Friday night, Damien threw a party. Not at home. At a rooftop in Midtown, under heat lamps and fairy lights, where the skyline looked like a crown. He invited employees, clients, press, and he invited Evelyn. Not because he wanted her there. Because he wanted the humiliation to be witnessed. Evelyn arrived wearing a simple black coat, hair pinned back. Walter had advised her not to go, but Evelyn insisted. "If I don't show up," Evelyn said, "they'll write the story without me." The rooftop was crowded. Music pulsed. People drank and laughed. Damien stood at the center like a king, Sloane at his side like a queen who hadn't earned her crown but wore it anyway. When Evelyn stepped into the light, conversations faltered. Heads turned. Sloane's eyes lit up. Damien smiled with practiced charm as he approached. "You came," he said, as if surprised. "I was invited," Evelyn replied. Damien glanced down at her hand. No ring. His smile sharpened. "Good," he said softly. "At least you understand where we are." Evelyn didn't blink. Sloane stepped closer, her voice sweet. "Evelyn," she said, "I love your coat. Very Brooklyn." A few people laughed, unsure if they were supposed to. Evelyn turned her gaze to Sloane. "Thank you," she said evenly. "I love your dress. Very temporary." The laughter stopped. Sloane's smile faltered for half a second, then returned bigger. Damien's eyes flashed. He leaned in close enough that only Evelyn could hear. "You think you're clever," he murmured, "but you're outnumbered." Evelyn's heart beat steady. "I've been outnumbered before," she said. Damien's lips curved. "Then you know what happens," he said. He stepped back and raised his voice, addressing the group like he was giving a toast. "Friends," Damien said, smile bright, "I want to thank you all for being here. Tonight's not just about Cross Meridian, it's about fresh starts." His arm slid around Sloane's waist. Sloane's chin lifted. Damien's gaze flicked to Evelyn, just long enough. "Some people hold you back," he continued. "Some people can't handle growth, but we move forward anyway." Evelyn felt the words land like stones thrown at her in public. She could see the employees, young, eager, watching to learn how loyalty worked. She could see the investors, older, calculating, watching to see who held real power. Evelyn stepped forward, not onto a stage, just into the circle of attention. Damien's smile tightened. "What are you doing?" he hissed under his breath. Evelyn looked up at him. "I'm reminding you," she said softly, "that your fresh start still has a past." Damien's eyes narrowed. Sloane laughed as if Evelyn had told a joke. Then Sloane lifted her glass. "To Damien," she said loudly, "for finally freeing himself." The crowd murmured, clapped. Evelyn watched Damien accept the praise like a man swallowing poison slowly. And in that moment, she understood. They weren't just trying to win the divorce. They were trying to build a new public narrative in which Evelyn was the villain and Sloane was the prize. Evelyn turned and walked away from the circle. Damien let her go, satisfied. He thought she had retreated. He didn't see Evelyn's hand slip into her coat pocket, didn't see her fingers close around the black pen with the W engraved. That pen wasn't just a pen, it was a memory, a key, a reminder that some names carried weight even when spoken softly. Over the next weeks, Damien's cruelty became more deliberate. He had Noah picked up from school early without telling Evelyn, then accused her of forgetting her own child. He changed passwords on joint accounts, then pretended Evelyn was irresponsible with money. He filed motions claiming Evelyn needed psychological evaluation. Each move was designed to push Evelyn into visible panic. But Evelyn didn't panic. She documented every email, every schedule change, every lie. Walter Pierce built a quiet file. And then came the day Damien used the final weapon. He showed up at Evelyn's townhouse with Sloane, in daylight, in front of neighbors. They stood on the sidewalk like they belonged there. Damien rang the bell like a man collecting property. Evelyn opened the door and saw them, and something ancient rose in her chest. Not rage, a cold, clean clarity. Sloane smiled first. "Hi," she said. "We just wanted to talk." Damien stepped forward. "We're here for Noah," he said. "He's coming with me." Evelyn's stomach clenched. "It's not your day," she said. Damien's eyes gleamed. "Read the petition," he said. "I'm requesting temporary custody until the court decides. You don't get to play games." Sloane tilted her head, feigning concern. "It's best for the child," she said, "with all your issues." Evelyn's hand tightened on the doorframe. "What issues?" Evelyn asked. Sloane's smile was soft. "The way you get," she said. "The way you disappear. Damien says you don't even get out of bed some days." Damien watched Evelyn closely, waiting for her to explode. Evelyn stared at them. Then, slowly, she stepped back. She didn't slam the door. She didn't argue. She simply said, "No." Damien blinked. "What?" he snapped. Evelyn's voice was steady. "No," she repeated. "You're not taking him like this." Damien's face reddened. "You don't have a choice," he hissed. "You have nothing. You have no power. The court will see you for what you are." Sloane's eyes glittered. "And when you lose," she added softly, "don't worry. We'll be kind. We'll let you visit." Evelyn felt her pulse in her throat. She looked at Damien, the man who had once brought her coffee in bed, who had once kissed her hands like they were sacred. Now he stood beside his mistress and spoke to her like she was a nuisance. Evelyn's gaze didn't drop. "You're very sure," she said quietly. Damien sneered. "I'm Damien Cross," he said. "I built an empire." Evelyn's lips curved, not into a smile but into something close. "No," she said. "You built a tower on top of someone else's foundation." Damien's eyes narrowed. "What did you say?" Evelyn didn't answer. She stepped forward and closed the door gently in their faces. No slam, no drama, just a soft click. Sloane's laughter cut through the wood. Damien's voice rose, angry. Evelyn leaned against the inside of the door and breathed. Her hands were shaking now, but she didn't let the shaking become sound. Upstairs, Noah called her name. "Mom?" Evelyn swallowed hard and forced calm into her voice. "I'm here," she called back. "I'm coming." In Noah's room, she sat beside him on the bed and smoothed his hair. "Are you mad?" Noah asked, eyes wide. Evelyn's throat tightened. "No," she lied gently. "I'm just thinking." Noah nodded like he understood more than he should. "Dad says you're going to take all his money," Noah whispered. Evelyn's breath caught. She stared at her son, too young to be used as a messenger, too sweet to be placed in a war. Evelyn kissed his forehead. "Your dad says a lot of things," she said softly. "But listen to me. You are safe. Do you hear me?" Noah nodded. Evelyn held him for a long time while the rain began again outside. And in her mind, the courtroom's future flashed. Judge Kessler's face, that question. "State your full legal name." Evelyn realized something then. Damien was using the court as a weapon, so she would use the court as a mirror. She would let the world hear the one name Damien had never respected, and she would watch what happened when an empire finally noticed it had been touched. The morning of the hearing, Manhattan looked like a black and white photograph. Rain smeared the edges of buildings. Taxis hissed through puddles. People moved fast, heads down, as if the weather might accuse them of something. Evelyn arrived at the courthouse alone, not because she had no one, because she wanted the first impression to be exactly what Damien expected. A quiet woman, no entourage, no power. She wore a dark coat, a plain blouse, no jewelry. Her hair was pulled back tight. Her hands held a small folder. In her pocket, the pen engraved with W. Inside the courthouse, security lines snaked. The air smelled like wet wool and old paper. Evelyn passed through the metal detector and walked down the hallway toward the courtroom. Voices echoed, shoes squeaked, doors slammed. Every sound felt amplified, as if the building itself was listening. Outside the courtroom, she saw Damien. He stood with Grant Hale and Sloane Hart. Damien looked sharp, expensive, confident. Sloane wore white again, as if she were celebrating. When Damien saw Evelyn, his lips curved. "There she is," he said loudly enough for others to hear. "My biggest fan." Sloane laughed. Evelyn didn't react. She walked past them. Damien's smile faltered slightly. He hated being ignored. Grant Hale's eyes followed Evelyn, calculating. Walter Pierce arrived a moment later, moving slower, leaning on a cane that looked decorative but wasn't. He wore an old suit that fit him like armor. "Ready?" Walter asked Evelyn quietly. Evelyn nodded. They entered the courtroom. The room was smaller than Evelyn expected. Not grand, not cinematic, just functional. Wood benches, a raised bench for the judge, flags, seal, microphones. Power didn't need beauty, it needed structure. Damien and Sloane sat at the plaintiff's table. Evelyn sat at the defendant's. Grant Hale arranged papers, confident. Walter Pierce placed his folder on the table and sat with careful patience. The clerk called the case. Everyone rose as Judge Miriam Kessler entered. She was in her late 50s, hair pulled back, eyes sharp and tired in the way of someone who had seen everything and still believed in rules. She sat, adjusted her glasses, and looked at the attorneys. "Good morning," she said. Damien's posture straightened as if he were in front of an investor panel. Grant Hale smiled. Walter Pierce nodded. Judge Kessler glanced at the file. Then her gaze landed on Evelyn. "Mrs. Cross," she said, tone neutral. "Before we proceed, I need to confirm your identity for the record." Evelyn's throat tightened. Not from fear, from the weight of what she was about to do. "State your full legal name," Judge Kessler said. Damien smirked, leaning toward Sloane. "Watch," he murmured. "She's going to choke." Sloane's eyes glittered. Evelyn inhaled. "Evelyn," she said. Her voice was calm, controlled. Then she spoke the word that changed everything. "Waverly." Grant Hale's pen stopped. Judge Kessler's eyes sharpened. Evelyn continued. "Evelyn Waverly Cross." Silence. Not theatrical silence, procedural silence. The kind that happens when systems recognize an anomaly. Judge Kessler looked down at her file again. Her fingers tapped once on the paper. Then she looked up, gaze fixed on Grant Hale. "Counsel," she said, "why wasn't the court notified?" Grant's smile stiffened. "Your Honor," he said, feigning confusion. Judge Kessler didn't blink. "This matter involves a Waverly," she said. "There is a standing notification order related to the Waverly Dominion Group and associated trusts. My clerk should have received notice." Damien's smirk vanished. He leaned toward Grant, whispering angrily. "What is she talking about?" Damien hissed. Grant's eyes flicked toward Damien, then back to the judge. "Your Honor," Grant said carefully, "my client is seeking divorce and custody. Mrs. Cross's maiden name—" "Is not a casual detail," Judge Kessler cut in, voice calm but firm. "Not in this county, not with that name." Sloane shifted in her chair, suddenly less comfortable. Walter Pierce cleared his throat gently. "If I may," Walter said. Judge Kessler turned to him. Walter's voice was quiet but carried. "Your Honor, my client has reason to believe that assets in this divorce are not what the plaintiff represents," he said, "and that her identity, specifically her connection to the Waverly Family Trust, has direct relevance." Damien's face drained of color. "What?" he snapped, unable to control himself. "Waverly Family Trust? That's—" "Sit down, Mr. Cross," Judge Kessler said, not raising her voice. "You will speak through counsel." Damien sat, furious, confused, suddenly aware that the room had shifted away from him. Walter Pierce opened his folder. He slid a document across to the clerk, who brought it to the judge. Judge Kessler's eyes moved across the page. Something in her expression tightened. She looked up at Evelyn. "Mrs. Cross," she said, voice quieter now. "Are you the Evelyn Waverly listed as beneficiary and controlling trustee in this document?" Evelyn swallowed once. "Yes," she said. Damien's breath hitched, audible. Sloane's eyes widened. Grant Hale's jaw tightened so hard a muscle jumped. Judge Kessler set the paper down carefully. "Counsel," she said, looking at Grant, "did your client disclose any connection between his holdings and the Waverly Trust?" Grant's voice was controlled. "No, Your Honor," he said, "because as far as we know, there is none." Walter Pierce's gaze stayed on the judge. "With respect," Walter said softly, "there is. Mr. Cross's primary holding company, Cross Meridian Holdings, LLC, was capitalized and stabilized through a loan facility underwritten by Waverly Dominion Bank. The guarantor is the Waverly Family Trust." Damien lurched forward. "That's not," he began. Judge Kessler's gavel tapped once. "Mr. Cross," she said, and her voice held the kind of warning that didn't need volume. "One more outburst and you will be removed." Damien shut his mouth, trembling with anger. Evelyn felt her heart pounding, but her face remained calm. This was why she had stayed quiet, because the moment the name entered the record, the rules changed. Walter continued. "My client did not come here to weaponize her family," he said. "She came here because Mr. Cross is attempting to claim sole ownership of assets that are entangled with a trust the court is obligated to treat with heightened scrutiny." Judge Kessler's eyes narrowed, calculating. "Mr. Hale," she said, "I am ordering immediate disclosure of all financial instruments connected to Waverly Dominion Bank, Waverly Family Trust, and any subsidiaries. Additionally, I'm issuing a temporary restraining order on the transfer of assets pending forensic review." Grant Hale's composure cracked just slightly. "Your Honor," he began. Judge Kessler lifted a hand. "No," she said. "This court will not be used as a laundromat." The words hit the room like a slap. Sloane went pale. Damien stared at Evelyn as if she had turned into a stranger. Evelyn met his gaze calmly. And for the first time in months, Damien looked uncertain, because Damien had believed the divorce would be a stage where he could humiliate Evelyn one last time. He had not realized he was walking into a courtroom that recognized her name like a trigger. He had not realized that in New York, certain names didn't just represent families, they represented institutions. And institutions did not like surprises. Judge Kessler looked down at her notes. "Now," she said, voice returning to procedure, "we will address custody, and we will address conduct, and we will do it with full honesty." Damien's face tightened. Grant whispered to him urgently, but Damien didn't hear. He was looking at Evelyn, and in his eyes was a question he couldn't ask out loud. "Who are you?" Evelyn's fingers closed around the pen in her pocket. She didn't answer his silent question. She let the court do it for her. People think the fall happens in one dramatic crash. But a fall like Damien Cross's is quieter. It begins with paperwork. It begins with the court ordering a forensic accountant. It begins with subpoenas that arrive at offices like cold wind. It begins with phone calls that stop getting answered. Within 48 hours of that hearing, Cross Meridian's finance team was panicking. Accounts that usually moved smoothly were suddenly flagged. Transfers delayed. Loans reviewed. The Waverly Dominion Bank Compliance Department, an entity that operated like an invisible army, had been notified. Because Judge Kessler had used the word Waverly on the record. And in the world of power, being mentioned on the record was like a flare. Evelyn watched it unfold from the outside with a strange calm. She didn't celebrate. She didn't post online. She didn't call friends to brag. She picked up Noah from school and made him macaroni for dinner and read him a bedtime story. Because the war wasn't about Damien's humiliation. It was about Noah's safety. And Evelyn knew that when men like Damien lose control, they don't just collapse. They lash. Damien's first lash came in the form of pleading. He showed up at Evelyn's townhouse 2 days later alone. No Sloane, no lawyers. He looked tired, his confidence frayed. Evelyn opened the door and saw him, and she felt a flicker of old softness, then it died quickly. "What do you want?" she asked. Damien's voice was low, urgent. "What is this?" he demanded. "What did you do?" Evelyn stared at him. "I didn't do anything," she said calmly. "I answered the judge's question." Damien's eyes flashed. "You knew," he said. "You knew this would happen." Evelyn's tone remained steady. "I knew you were lying," she said. "I knew you were trying to take my son. And I knew you thought you could do it because you believed I was powerless." Damien ran a hand through his hair. "Evelyn, listen," he said, voice tightening. "This isn't just divorce anymore. This is Waverly. Do you understand what you've dragged into this?" Evelyn's eyes sharpened. "No," she said quietly. "Do you understand what you dragged into our kitchen years ago when you asked me to sign papers you didn't understand?" Damien froze. Evelyn stepped closer, keeping her voice low. "You built your company," she said. "You worked hard. I won't deny that. But you also used structures you didn't earn. You took security you didn't create. And when you decided I was disposable, you forgot that some things don't disappear just because you stop respecting them." Damien's throat bobbed. He looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. "Who are you?" he whispered. Evelyn didn't answer because she didn't want him to know her as a Waverly. She wanted him to know her as the woman he had underestimated. Damien's voice turned sharp. "Fix it," he said. "Call them. Call your family. Tell them to back off." Evelyn's lips curved faintly. "Back off," she repeated. "Damien, they haven't even stepped forward. This is the court reacting to your lies." Damien's eyes widened. "You're enjoying this," he accused. Evelyn's gaze went cold. "No," she said, "I'm surviving it." Damien stared at her, breathing hard. Then he lowered his voice, desperate. "What do you want?" he asked. Evelyn's answer came instantly. "Joint custody," she said, "a fair settlement, and an end to the smear campaign." Damien's jaw tightened. "You're asking to destroy me," he said. Evelyn shook her head. "I'm asking you to stop trying to destroy me," she corrected. "There's a difference." Damien's eyes filled with something ugly, pride fighting fear. "I can't," he said. "You don't understand. Sloane." Evelyn's gaze sharpened. "Sloane," she repeated. "So she's still here in your choices." Damien flinched. "She helped build the company," he insisted. She helped destroy our marriage," Evelyn cut in, voice quiet but lethal. "And you let her." Damien's shoulders slumped for the first time in years. Evelyn could see the man beneath the CEO mask, and it made her sad. But sadness didn't change outcomes. "Goodbye, Damien," Evelyn said. She closed the door. The next lash came in the courtroom. At the next hearing, Damien returned with Sloane and Grant Hale. Faces tightened into war mode. Grant argued aggressively, claiming Evelyn's Waverly connection was irrelevant to custody. He claimed Evelyn was manipulating the court with intimidation. He claimed the financial entanglement was exaggerated. Walter Pierce responded with quiet precision. He didn't raise his voice. He simply placed evidence into the record like nails into a coffin. Security footage from Damien's office showing Sloane removing documents from a safe. Emails between Damien and his CFO discussing moving money before the divorce. Bank statements showing transfers to shell accounts. A private investigator report proving Damien had picked up Noah from school without informing Evelyn. A recording, legal, obtained through discovery, of Damien calling Evelyn unstable in a meeting, laughing as employees nodded. Judge Kessler listened without expression. Then she turned to Damien. "Mr. Cross," she said, "did you instruct your staff to restrict your wife's access to joint accounts?" Damien's jaw clenched. Answer yes or no," Judge Kessler said. Damien glanced at Grant, then back at the judge. "Yes," he said. Judge Kessler's eyes narrowed. "Did you attempt to remove assets from the marital estate prior to filing for divorce?" she asked. Damien's throat tightened. "No," he said quickly. Walter Pierce spoke softly. "Your Honor," he said, "Exhibit C shows a transfer of $500,000 from Cross Meridian Holdings to Hart Consulting LLC 2 weeks before the petition was filed." The room shifted. Sloane's face went rigid. Grant's eyes flashed warning at Damien. Damien stared at the exhibit on the screen, his lips parting slightly. Judge Kessler's gaze landed on Sloane. "Ms. Hart," she said, "is Hart Consulting your entity?" Sloane's voice was bright, too bright. "Yes," she said, "it's consulting work. Judge Kessler held up a hand. "No," she said, "we're not doing performances today." The gavel tapped once. "Mr. Cross," Judge Kessler said, "I am referring this matter to the district attorney for review of potential fraud and contempt. Additionally, I am ordering temporary joint custody effective immediately, with supervised exchanges until further notice." Damien's face went white. "What?" he snapped, forgetting himself. Judge Kessler's eyes turned cold. "You do not get to use your child as leverage," she said. "Not in my courtroom." Damien's hands trembled. Sloane leaned toward him, whispering urgently, but Damien didn't respond. He was staring at Evelyn. Evelyn's face remained calm, but inside something unclenched because Noah was safe, for now. But the fall wasn't done. The final collapse came not from the court, but from the empire Damien had ignored. 1 week later, Cross Meridian's board held an emergency meeting. Damien expected it to be about finances, about stabilizing investors. Instead, he walked into a conference room where the air felt different. The board members didn't smile at him. They didn't greet Sloane warmly. They sat stiffly, eyes avoiding his. At the head of the table sat a woman Damien had never met. She wore a dark suit, hair silver, posture perfect. Her gaze was polite, but her eyes held the kind of authority that didn't need volume. Damien frowned. "Who is this?" he demanded. The board chair cleared his throat. "Damien," he said quietly, "this is Ms. Eleanor Waverly. She represents Waverly Dominion's Compliance Council." Damien felt his stomach drop. "Waverly?" he repeated. Eleanor Waverly's smile was thin. "Mr. Cross," she said, voice smooth, "we've been monitoring your financial instruments for some time. Your divorce has accelerated certain reviews." Damien's mouth went dry. "This is private," he said. "This is my company." Eleanor tilted her head slightly. "Our records disagree," she said. She placed a document on the table and slid it forward. Damien stared at it. It was a trust instrument. Waverly Family Trust, Evelyn's name printed clearly, beneficiary, controlling trustee, and beneath that, ownership structures. Damien's company wasn't fully his, not even close. Waverly Dominion's financing terms included equity covenants tied to the trust, a backdoor ownership that Evelyn had signed years ago in their kitchen. Damien's voice broke. This is impossible," he whispered. Eleanor's gaze remained calm. "It's paperwork," she said. "Paperwork is never impossible." Damien's hands trembled as he flipped through pages. His entire identity, CEO, builder, empire maker, was suddenly revealed as conditional. A man who had been allowed to hold power as long as he didn't anger the wrong name. Sloane's voice snapped through the room. "Damien didn't know," she said quickly. "This is Evelyn's doing. She's—" Eleanor's eyes turned to Sloane. "And you," Eleanor said softly, "are Hart Consulting." Sloane froze. Eleanor slid another packet across. "Your entity received funds under suspicious timing," Eleanor said. "We're freezing accounts pending investigation." Sloane's face drained. "You can't," she whispered. Eleanor's voice remained polite. "Yes," she said, "we can." Damien's breath came fast. He looked around the room, searching for allies. The board avoided his gaze. Because the board didn't serve Damien, they served survival. Eleanor folded her hands. "Mr. Cross," she said, "you have two options. You cooperate fully with forensic review, or we terminate financing and trigger default clauses that will dismantle your company within days." Damien stared at her, stunned. "This is because of my wife," he whispered. Eleanor's expression didn't change. "This is because you believed your wife was nobody," she corrected gently, "and you acted accordingly." Damien's eyes burned. He stumbled out of the meeting room like a man leaving a funeral. By the time he reached the elevator, his phone buzzed, a text from Grant Hale. "DA's office requested documents. We need to talk immediately." Damien's knees nearly buckled. For the first time in his adult life, he realized something terrifying. Power had never been his. It had been rented, and the lease had just expired. The final hearing came 3 weeks later. The courtroom was the same: wood, microphones, rain tapping on windows. But the people inside were different. Damien looked thinner, his suit still expensive, but the confidence was gone, replaced by strain. Sloane didn't wear white. She wore gray, as if trying to disappear. Evelyn wore the same simple coat, hair pinned back, face calm. Walter Pierce sat beside her, hands folded. Grant Hale sat beside Damien, jaw tight. Judge Kessler entered, and the room rose. When everyone sat, Judge Kessler looked at the file. Then she spoke. "This court has reviewed financial disclosures," she said, "and the findings are troubling." Her gaze turned to Damien. "Mr. Cross," she said, "you attempted to misrepresent the marital estate. You attempted to restrict the mother's access to the child. You attempted to frame your wife as unstable without supporting evidence." Damien swallowed hard. Judge Kessler turned to Evelyn. "Mrs. Cross," she said, "the court recognizes the complexity of your identity in this matter. But complexity does not excuse concealment that affects proceedings." Evelyn nodded once. "Yes, Your Honor," she said quietly. Judge Kessler's gaze softened just a fraction. "I also recognize," the judge continued, "that you did not initiate this weaponization. You responded to it." Then Judge Kessler looked at both parties. "Here's the court's order," she said. The words fell like measured stones. Joint legal custody. Shared physical custody with structured schedule. Damien to pay child support based on recalculated income. Evelyn to receive equitable distribution of marital assets. Assets now properly valued with trust entanglement disclosed. Restraining order on harassment, including public smear campaigns. And finally, "Mr. Cross," Judge Kessler said, "this court is also referring the matter of pre-divorce asset transfers and potential fraud for further review by the appropriate authorities." Damien's face crumpled slightly. Sloane's hands shook. Evelyn sat still, heart pounding. Judge Kessler lifted her gavel. "One more thing," she said. Her gaze landed on Evelyn. "Mrs. Cross," she said, voice quieter, "you came in here as nobody." Evelyn's throat tightened. Judge Kessler continued. "This court doesn't care about empires," she said. "It cares about truth. And I suggest you remember that as you move forward." Evelyn nodded. "Yes," she whispered. The gavel came down. Case adjourned. Damien sat frozen. Sloane stared at the floor. Walter Pierce gently touched Evelyn's elbow. "It's done," he murmured. Evelyn inhaled slowly. Outside the windows, rain continued. But it sounded different now. Less like a countdown. More like a cleansing. Evelyn walked out of the courthouse and into the rain. No motorcade, no cameras, just wet air and the city moving around her like it always had. Walter Pierce paused beside her under the awning. "You okay?" he asked. Evelyn looked out at the street. Taxis splashed through puddles. People hurried by with umbrellas. A vendor shouted under a tarp. Life didn't stop for courtroom drama, but Evelyn felt something inside her, something she hadn't felt in months. Space. "I don't know what I am now," she admitted softly. Walter's eyes crinkled. "You're a mother," he said. "And you're free." Evelyn's throat tightened. Free. It was such a simple word, and yet it tasted strange. Walter reached into his pocket and handed Evelyn the black pen engraved with W. "You dropped this in my office once," he said. "I kept it. Figured you'd want it back when you were ready." Evelyn stared at the pen. She remembered signing in the kitchen, trying to protect Damien from a world he didn't understand. She remembered hiding her name like it was a weapon that could hurt her son. Now the pen felt lighter, not because the name was less powerful, because she no longer feared it. Evelyn closed her fingers around it. "Thank you," she whispered. Walter nodded and stepped back. "I'm going to file final paperwork," he said. "Call me if anything changes." Evelyn watched him disappear into the crowd. Then she turned and began walking. She didn't go to a celebratory lunch. She didn't go to a fancy apartment. She went to pick up Noah. At Noah's school, the hallway smelled like crayons and disinfectant. Children's voices echoed. When Noah saw Evelyn, his face lit up. "Mom!" he shouted, running to her. Evelyn knelt and held him tightly. Noah pulled back and looked at her, serious. "Did you win?" he asked. Evelyn swallowed. How do you explain to a child that winning isn't always about crushing someone? How do you explain that sometimes survival looks like quiet paperwork and boundaries? Evelyn smiled gently. "I made sure you're safe," she said. "That's what matters." Noah nodded slowly, absorbing. "Dad's mad," Noah whispered. "He said you did something with your name." Evelyn's breath caught. She looked at Noah, then down at his small hand in hers. "My name," she said softly, "is just a name." Noah frowned. "But people got scared," he said, "at court when they said it." Evelyn stared at the rain outside the school windows. She thought of Damien's face when he realized his empire was built on something he didn't control. She thought of Sloane's eyes when the court stopped treating her like a queen and started treating her like evidence. Evelyn looked back at Noah. "Sometimes," she said gently, "a name reminds people that you're not allowed to treat someone like they're nothing." Noah considered that. Then quietly, he asked the question that made Evelyn's chest ache. "Are you nothing?" he asked. Evelyn blinked fast. She held Noah's face between her hands. "No," she said firmly, "never." Noah's shoulders relaxed. He leaned into her hands like he believed her. Evelyn stood and took his backpack. They walked home in the rain, sharing an umbrella that was too small. At home, Evelyn made dinner and listened to Noah talk about spelling tests and a kid who cheated at kickball. The simplicity of it felt like medicine. Later, after Noah fell asleep, Evelyn sat at the kitchen table alone. The same table where she had once signed away pieces of her life. Rain tapped softly against the window. Evelyn placed the pen with the W on the table. She stared at it for a long time. In the silence, her phone buzzed. A message from Damien. Just 2 lines. "I didn't know. Why didn't you tell me who you were?" Evelyn stared at the screen. For a moment she felt the old urge to explain, to justify, to soften, to make him understand. But she realized something. Damien didn't deserve the story of her escape. He only deserved the consequence of his contempt. Evelyn typed a reply, slowly. "I told you who I was. You just didn't listen until the court did." She hit send. Then she turned the phone face down. Evelyn stood, walked to the window, and watched the rain blur the streetlights into soft gold. She thought of the empire, Waverly Dominion, still out there, massive, indifferent, a machine of power. She knew it would reach for her now that her name had been spoken on the record. They would call, they would offer help, they would offer control. Evelyn placed a hand on the glass. She didn't want to be owned again, but she also understood something she hadn't understood when she was 22 and running. Power wasn't the enemy, silence was. And the kind of silence that let men like Damien rewrite you into nothing, that silence was poison. Evelyn turned away from the window. She went upstairs and checked on Noah. He slept with his mouth slightly open, hair messy, breathing steady. Evelyn tucked the blanket around him. She leaned down and whispered, so softly the house barely heard, "You'll never have to beg for someone to respect you," she promised. "Not if I can help it." Back downstairs, Evelyn opened a drawer and pulled out a stack of old papers. Waverly papers, trust documents, letters. The things she had hidden as if hiding them would change reality. She didn't read them with fear now. She read them with strategy. Because there was a difference between being trapped by an empire and learning how to use it without letting it use you. Weeks later, the headline shifted, not about her, about Damien. Cross Meridian's financing had been restructured. Damien was stepping down pending investigations. Sloan Hart's consulting firm was under review. People whispered. Damien's friends stopped calling. The world that had cheered him at rooftop parties suddenly found other men to applaud. Evelyn heard about it through distant channels. She didn't smile. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt tired. And underneath the tiredness, she felt relief. One afternoon, months later, Evelyn sat in a small cafe near the river with Walter Pierce. The rain had finally stopped for the day, and sunlight made the water look like moving glass. Walter sipped coffee. "You're getting calls," he said. Evelyn nodded. "My family," she said. Walter raised an eyebrow. "You going to answer?" he asked. Evelyn stared out at the river. In her mind, she saw Judge Kessler's eyes, sharp, controlled, fair. This court doesn't care about empires. It cares about truth. Evelyn exhaled. "I'll answer," she said, "but on my terms." Walter nodded approvingly. "That's the difference," he said, "between being born into power and choosing what it means." Evelyn's fingers traced the edge of her coffee cup. She thought of Damien's mockery, his certainty, his belief that Evelyn was nobody. She thought of how quickly certainty had cracked when the court heard one name. Evelyn looked down at her hands. They were steady now, not because life was easy, because she no longer feared being seen. When she left the cafe, she walked along the river, Noah's small hand in hers. Noah talked about wanting to be an astronaut, or a chef, or a superhero. Evelyn listened, smiling, letting him dream. Because the greatest revenge wasn't court orders or asset freezes. It was building a life so peaceful that the people who tried to destroy you couldn't reach it anymore. That night, Evelyn placed the black pen engraved with W in a small box with Noah's drawings. Not as a weapon, as a reminder. Names could become chains. Or they could become keys. And Evelyn Waverly Cross had finally learned how to hold hers. If this story touched something in you, if you've ever been treated like you were nothing until a system finally listened, leave a comment with just one word, seen. Because you're not alone, and you were never nothing.